Hello and welcome to another video and podcast from fantasyfootballscout.co.uk. My name is David and today I'm joined by Mark, and you who are watching on YouTube will notice that we don't have any ranks next to our names, and that's because we're talking about an entirely different fantasy game. That's right, we both had such terrible luck in game week 5, we decided we're going to try our luck at something else. And today we're going to talk about UCL Fantasy because the Champions League is back, and of course there is a fantasy game to go with that. There's been plenty of content on Fantasy Football Scout, Fantasy Football community, and the wider Scout network as well. And yeah, Mark's joining us today to fill us in on the eve of Newcastle's return to the Champions League as well. So it's an exciting time for you, isn't it, Mark?
I'm trying to convince colleagues and stuff that my interest in this fantasy game is purely coincidental and nothing to do with Newcastle's involvement. And part of that's true, but it sort of means everything. But at the same time, you got to play it cool because you're surrounded by fans of Chelsea and Man United and Tottenham, and it's just normal to them. So you've got to pretend that it's normal, but actually, we're pretty excited up here.
Like your first day at secondary school, where you want to look cool, but on the inside, you're just stressed, excited, all of the emotions at opposite ends and imagining what might happen or what might not happen or, all the different things. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a chance because last season was a bit of possibly overachievement, and the way this season started, you already think, well, this might be a not one off, but the chances of doing it again next season might be a bit tougher. So just got to make the most of this, really, and just enjoy it and just spread the name around Europe, really.
Well, of course, being able to select Newcastle players both in FPL and UCL Fantasy is all part of that enjoyment experience, especially for the Geordies. But of course, that's also true for fans of other clubs as well. Before we're going to have a look at some of the best players from those clubs in a minute. But before we do that, there's a couple of things, there's bits of housekeeping we have to do before we start looking at the best players. First things first, we're going to have a look at the best way for you guys to follow Champions League fantasy coverage this year. And Fantasy Football Scout, as ever, has you covered here. We've got our UCL Fantasy podcast, which is comes out regular installments with people who know much more about Champions League football than me. And so, if nothing else, the best advice I can give today is to subscribe to this particular podcast on whichever podcast platform you get your podcast from. They do some great content. They've been putting together some brilliant stuff, team reveals, chip strategy, all sorts. And we're gonna just have a look at just the surface, the tip of the iceberg of some of that today. And if you want to see what's below the surface, then this is the podcast for you. But before we get any further, as I said, housekeeping does continue. Because for anyone who's out there who wants to play UCL Fantasy perhaps for the first time, or anyone who's not played it in a while and needs a refresher course, perhaps Newcastle fans might be among them. Give us a bit of a rundown if you can, Mark, in terms of how the game works, how it's similar to FPL, how it's different, and any similarities perhaps with like the UEFA games we played in the past, like the European Championships ones, things like that. So yeah, take us away.
Yes, so it's to an FPL manager, it's a very familiar game. There are a few differences which I'll get to shortly, but on the basic level, it's 100 million euros budget for the group stage, 15-man squad, just like FPL, 5 defenders, 5 midfielders, maximum of 3 per club. This is all quite familiar. And the points are almost exactly the same. There's just a couple of differences. You get more defensive players. They get a point for every 3 ball recoveries. So that adds a little bit more appeal to some players that might not have otherwise. And if any goals are scored from outside of the box, there's an additional 1 point. So little things like that. There's no bonus points. Instead, one player of the match gets 3 bonuses. So there's slight differences like that, but on a very basic level, it's very, very similar game. There are chips as well, but there's only 2 chips, wild card and limitless. Limitless is just a free hit, but no budget. You could genuinely pick the 15 most expensive players if you wanted to. And before the round of 16, it's unlimited transfers. So again, that's virtually another wild card. 2 free transfers per group match day. You can only roll over one of them. And the match day, as opposed to a game week, is what you call the Tuesday and Wednesday combined.
Nice. Yeah, lots of similarities, but lots of differences as well. And is there any differences in terms of the way that selection works? Substitutions and things like that. Anything there? In the past, when I play games that have that, it does keep me on my toes. That's for sure.
Yeah, so if you've played some of the sort of the international tournament ones like the World Cup or the Euro sort of fantasy games, you might be familiar with the ability to switch lineup and captaincies day to day. And that's something that UCL Fantasy has as well. So if you can select the captain on Tuesday, and if they don't do very well, that's fine. You can just switch it to one of your Wednesday players. And it's the same with people in the actual lineup. Unless your Tuesday player has been sent off, you can move any disappointing ones to the bench and replace them for Wednesday. So that adds a whole new strategy to the game, in fact, really, because in FPL we sort of have the second goalkeeper and the fifth defender, stuff like that, players who you're never going to use. But in this game, there's not really any. Ideally, there wouldn't be that, because you want to have you want to maximize the routes to points as possible. You want all 5 of your defenders to be good options, and you can just simply move them in and out depending on performance.
Yeah. I have to say, it's these sorts of games, I think they are always going to really, really appeal to people who really love going into really minute levels of detail for fantasy football, for Premier League and stuff like that. And so people who are avid listeners and watchers and consumers of Fantasy Football Scout content, members as well, especially those who are used to going through, lots of different stats and tables and things, it does suit people like that, because you mentioned earlier about the extra points for goals outside the box, extra points for sort of defensive contributions as well. If you're sat there watching this or listening to this, depending on where you're accessing this, thinking about, what, sometimes I'm in the members area and I'm looking at all of these different things I wish were rewarded in FPL. Well, UCL Fantasy is the best way to sort of make decisions based on the things you've learned. You want to put what you've learned into action, and you can do that in UCL Fantasy, no problem. And again, also, if you particularly enjoy being able to try and maximize the opportunities for your budget players on your bench, yeah, as Mark says, you can just give them a go on the Tuesday. If it doesn't work, you can sub them out. And if you do get a big haul out of your really cheap defender, you might as well just keep him in, and all those sorts of things can just kind of enhance enjoyment for people who quite enjoy their fantasy football to be hands-on. If you get a game week sometimes in FPL where it's like, well, there's not really much to do other than just roll my transfer and I already know who I want to start, you kind of find yourself all sort of twiddling your thumbs. But UCL is a little bit more hands-on, a little bit more applied, and that does appeal to a certain brand of fantasy manager, doesn't it?
Yeah, the active managers should, in theory, do better in this game.
Laying down the gauntlet nice and early. Like if you like all that stuff, you have to do better. And if you don't, we're coming after you. Let's.
In theory, was there for protection purposes.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, let's move on to what things look like for the first match day, because of course that's very much what people are building their squads for. So, and if there's anyone out there who just sort of needs reminders of what the draw looks like, I mean, I certainly did, because I'm a Reading fan, so you probably imagine I don't pay as much attention to the elite European leagues as I probably could or should do. And so yeah, there's a lot of focus around building teams around. Well, of course, as Mark mentioned, you are going to be building your teams for the group stage, and then you get your unlimited transfers beyond that. So the groups are super important for working out that squad. And of course, the match day 1 fixture is also very important as well. So Group A is Bayern Munich, Manchester United, Copenhagen, and Galatasaray. Group B is Sevilla, Arsenal, PSV, and RC Lens. Group C is Napoli, Real Madrid, Braga, and Union Berlin. Group D is Benfica, Inter Milan, Salzburg, Real Sociedad. Group E is Feyenoord, Atletico Madrid, Lazio, and Celtic. Group F, this is the nasty one, or the exciting one, depending on what brand of Newcastle fan you are. It is the Magpies, of course, alongside AC Milan, Borussia Dortmund, and Paris Saint-Germain. Group G is Man City, Leipzig. I'm gonna attempt this. Cervena Zvezda. Who knows if I got that right? Young Boys. That's a nice, easy one to say. And then Group H, Barcelona, Porto, Shakhtar Donetsk, and Antwerp. So those are the groups there. And this is the match day 1 fixtures. Milan versus Newcastle, Young Boys versus Leipzig, Barcelona versus Antwerp, Feyenoord versus Celtic, Lazio versus Atletico, and City versus that team that I'm not going to attempt a second pronunciation of. Paris Saint-Germain versus Dortmund, Shakhtar Donetsk versus Porto. That's on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, Galatasaray versus Copenhagen, Real Madrid versus Union Berlin, Arsenal versus PSV, Bayern Munich, Harry Kane leading the line against the opposition he's used to facing, Manchester United, Benfica versus Salzburg, Braga versus Napoli, Real Sociedad against Inter Milan, and Lens are travelling to Sevilla. So that is the first round of fixtures that people are looking at. And what we do have access to is a fantastic season ticker that has been pulled together by some of our people behind the scenes at Fantasy Football Scout, because all of that good content you could get for FPL, you can also get a lot of it for UCL Fantasy as well, and that's including the season ticker result, which I've just popped up on the screen. And so I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to hand back to Mark to sort of talk us through, the groups that people are targeting for their players, what type of groups we're looking at here, which fixtures to look at. And I guess this also comes with a sort of strategy-based question of how much do people build their squads for match day 1? How much do you take into account the entirety of the group stage? Because, of course, those chips that you're going to play, they have optimal times to use them. And I'm going to imagine that the optimal time to use those chips is largely going to impact to what extent you go short-term or long-term between match days 1 and 6 with your team selection. So, yeah, lots to unpack there. I'll let you take it in baby steps. But, yeah, what's people's thinking here?
Well, yeah, so amongst all the brilliant articles that have gone up on both Scout and Fantasy Football Community, and I'd really recommend reading some of those because it's a lot of strategy talk as well, because the strategy is different. And there's a piece going up on Scout from Milanista, FPL Milanista, and he was saying things like, you've got to be more aggressive with this game than in FPL because there's a lot fewer, instead of 38 game weeks, there's 13 match days. So like every week counts a bit more. And certainly when it comes to chips, a popular strategy in seasons past has been to, using both of them in the group stages, first of all, because that's theoretically a time when there's a lot of weaker teams and a lot of stronger teams. So there should be a lot of hauls there and big wins, and you want to take advantage of that, because in the knockout round, using a chip might have less impact when the matches are more hard fought and maybe fewer goals. So one popular strategy is to use Limitless in game week 2 so that your initial squad can purely focus on the first set of matches. And then wildcard in game week 3, because game week match days 3 and 4 are just the reverse fixtures of each other. So if you're a team who has like a good match day 3, you're going to have 2 of them back to back, and it would be fantastic to sort of triple up on those sides. So Milanista does think that it might not be the answer this time, the way the fixtures have landed. There's like a lot of nice, not so many nice ones in match day 2, so the Limitless might not be used to its full potential. But at the same time, a Limitless in match day 6 would also be wasted potential, because you might see a lot of already qualified teams rotate. So bearing that in mind, and bearing in mind that you probably want a squad that's quite evenly balanced between Tuesday and Wednesday fixtures. So ideally you'd have half of your players from the first 4 groups and half from the second 4 groups, so that it makes the switching between nights process better. And yeah, you could do all sorts of things with that. Like he was saying that last season you could afford to go very, very risky with your Tuesday captain. You could pick an attacking left back as your captain, knowing that you have the safety of the Wednesday captain in your back pocket. So, okay, you're attacking left back blanks. Well, that's fine. Haaland's the next night. Easy. So there's potential for that as well. And another thing is that the deadline for each match day goes right up to the first kickoffs. So there will be, for example, match day 1, Tuesday night, we'll already know the Milan, Newcastle, Leipzig, Young Boys teams by the deadline. And you could use that to your advantage because with that knowledge, you could therefore pick a brilliant differential, or there could be a very cheap midfielder who's been given the nod, and you can sort of use that to put the money elsewhere. So, yeah, so I think when we come to my squad later on, it is kind of heavily with match day 1 fixtures in mind, but admittedly, haven't really thought in detail yet about what the chip strategy is going to be.
Yeah, it certainly is a competition, and again, it reminds me very much of the World Cup and the Euros games, where you need to maximise your points in the group stage because that's the best opportunity to have differentials with other people. Because it's not just about the fixture difficulty; it's just as more and more teams get eliminated, the pool of available players continues to shrink with every round, and in the first 6, that's obviously not going to happen. And although arguably you could say the pool of players starts to shrink around match day 5 and 6 because some teams, if they win their first 4 games, could use match days 5 and 6 to rotate. So yeah, that's when you want to have a look at them. And in terms of match day 1 as well, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is the way that the fixtures have wound up is that match day 1 is when seed number 1 and seed number 4 from the different pots that they've been drawn are in match day 1. So I think it means that your best teams in every group, in theory, have the worst available team according to the rankings in match day 1, which again is also quite useful because you can sort of target that a little bit more. So, which again I think is quite nice. I think it's what makes UCL Fantasy a game that you can sort of enjoy with a lot more freedom in many ways than you can with FPL. I mean, it's not to criticize FPL. I mean, I love playing FPL, but some of the weekly stresses we have in FPL. You don't have to worry about so much here because you can build exciting, aggressive, short-term teams, and if they don't work out, you can use the chips. It's advantageous to use them early anyway, so you can correct some of those early team-building mistakes, and it just sort of encourages draft building on a more sort of free level. So, yeah, I think there's lots to enjoy here, lots of fun to be had, and of course, the Champions League is always fantastic entertainment anyway. So, yeah, that's very much that's my view on it. If there's people on there umming and ahhing about playing, I think it's definitely worth considering. We said we'd come on to your team in a minute, Mark, but let's have a look if we can just go through some of the big names to help people out perhaps in understanding who the must-owns are. Because I suppose if you're watching this and you're perhaps British based, which from what we can see from our analytics is most of you, you might not necessarily have as much of an idea on what's going on in the European leagues as you perhaps would like. There's a lot of interest in the English players because there's some kindly priced ones at Newcastle. There's some important must-haves at Man City and maybe Arsenal as well. But yeah, who are the sort of the important ones to own? Who are the ones that we should be scared of not owning, but perhaps we don't see them play every Saturday because they play in a different league and it's hard to know who they are. So yeah.
Just for match day 1 or in general?
Well, match day. Let's focus on match day 1. I think because there's very much this view of building these match day 1 squads to get the most out of that first game week. So I think it's got to be there.
Yeah, well, one of the differences with the player pricing is that unlike an FPL, the Champions League game has a lot of premium priced forwards. So here you've got Haaland, Mbappe, Kane, Lewandowski, Osimhen, people like that. Whereas I guess in FPL, normally you would tend to have like the likes of Salah and De Bruyne and all that lot. Before this season, you had Fernandes, who was 10 million plus as well. So there's a slightly different order. Like it's a bit, your team is more likely to be top heavy in this game because having only one of those big strikers would feel like a bit of a waste, especially when Lewandowski is at home to Antwerp. Haaland's at home to the Serbian side. Harry Kane against Manchester United, which of course may be the easiest fixture of them all.
Yeah.
Not really. So yeah, and even then there's players like if you are targeting just the first game week, Galatasaray at home to Copenhagen. So you got Icardi, for example. So there's a lot of match day 1 players who on paper have nice fixtures, the Man City guys, the Barcelona guys, um, on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, it's less clear cut on Wednesday. In all honesty, there's some matches that look fairly even-ish. You got sort of Bayern versus Manchester United, Sociedad, Inter, games like that. So yeah, in terms of targeting players, Leipzig players are probably quite popular against young boys. Um, Anybody in Group F, that group of death, I guess fixtures will never be a reason why you would pick a PSG or Milan player, because the fixtures, as was on that ticker the fixture ticker that you put up, those are all 6 fixtures are classed as difficult. So that would purely be 4 more fixtures. And yeah, it's just as with FPL, just sort of keep an eye on what the managers say in their press conferences. How strong will Pep Guardiola go at home to the weakest side in the group? Barcelona are at home to Antwerp, and I think Xavi has already made a comment, a very sort of De Zerbi-esque comment about rotation. So that already puts a little bit of nervousness into which Barca defender do you go for? Do you go for Jules Koundé, or is his place in jeopardy now? So yeah, and another thing, a lot of the good goalkeepers, unfortunately, because with the rotation between the Tuesday and Wednesday nights, really you should have one Tuesday goalkeeper and one Wednesday goalkeeper. And unfortunately, a lot of the better options all seem to be in the same half of the draw, which is a little bit irritating. Sort of removes that prospect. But yeah, there's a lot of teams, 32 teams as opposed to 20, so that's a lot of players.
Yeah, very true, very true. I suppose, handily enough, you can just about focus them around those fixtures if you're going to play a 1 week to the next, especially in the first 3. But yeah, certainly it's there's lots to choose from for sure. And you've been playing around with that today. This is the second squad that Mark sent me, which just goes to show just how much choice there is. And as you say, an excellent point here is it is a very top-heavy selection, but that's not abnormal for Champions League fantasy teams, because we see some of the continent's best strikers in this tournament, when sometimes there can be a bit of a disparity between teams, because of course there's always going to be 1, maybe 2 teams in a group that perhaps they're there for the first time, or they didn't actually win their domestic league and they're up against a titan like a Bayern or a Barca or something. And those matchups do really, really favour your goal-scoring centre forwards, and that's why we've got Lewandowski, we've got Haaland, and we've got Icardi up front for you. I'll reel through it for the benefit of the podcast listeners, and then you can tell us about some of the 50-50s you've been mulling over and some of the strategy you're thinking about. So, and I'm going to try and get these names right as well. So we've got Blažević in goal and Kepa as your 2 goalkeepers. Hopefully I've said that correctly. Koundé, Geertruida, Raum, Gvardiol and Dumfries as the back 5. Sané, Simons, Ivanusec, Bellingham and Thuram as the midfielders. Mark is grimacing. I'm clearly getting some of these wrong.
No.
Lewandowski, Haaland and Icardi. Those are easy. Those are easy ones. But yeah, that's your 15. Who were sort of the first names on the team sheet? Anyone undecided on at the moment?
Well, first of all, I have when you asked me to put together a squad there, I did sort of I came up with 2 ones that were fairly different pretty quickly, because I'm struggling a bit with the budget. There's a lot of good players that I really wanted that couldn't get here. So it was using the idea that your 5th defender and your 5th midfielder can be good options, but then at the same time it can't really afford anything above the basic values anyway. So yeah, the 2 of the first picks involve ownership, because the Bellingham and Haaland are by far the most owned players in the game. Bellingham, at the time of recording, is in 75% of squads, and Haaland is in 74%. After that, it's 30.
Wow.
The next best one after that's 30. So it's
It's
those
that,
two.
yeah, it's that Bellingham price, right? So what I'd seen is that he's come down in price. Is that right? But he started the season like super well,
Yeah,
for club and country.
yeah, yes, he has, and it just makes so much sense that. And once that price of 7.5 million was revealed, I think that sort of made a lot of managers' minds up. So it's beyond those two where there's a bit of variation going on. I did really want a Man City midfielder in there, even someone like Rodri, who is going to be rewarded for his ball recoveries, but is also starting to score goals for Man City. I thought that would be a good combination, but it was a budgetary reason. Saka was on the verge at some point, but sacrifices had to be made. And it's picking Lewandowski and Haaland is great, but that means not having Kane, so that's a shame as well. But you can't have them all, unfortunately. And yeah, even a couple of the defenders, like I was really tempted to get Alphonse Davis. Theo Fernandez is always a popular, like he's such a good attacking player, but yeah, in the end, I've gone for a few guesses. I think Blaswich is a 4.5 goalkeeper for Leipzig, and he seems to be fairly nailed in goal for them, and he plays on a different night to Kepa, who again feels fairly underpriced because he sort of because of Courtois' injury. That's sort of, it's like a backup goalkeeper who's going to start. So that 5 million looks pretty good. Dumfries and his teammate DeMarco are very, very attacking, sort of wing backs. So even though their first fixture doesn't immediately stand out, it's just their attacking potential is so high. Guardiola was just a case of guessing Pep's defenders, as always. That could switch. David Raum offers potential at both ends of the pitch. There's a couple of Feyenoord players in there, Gertruda and Ivanusic. The latter I'd only really thought of because I'd seen online that he was priced at 4.5 million as a 4.5 midfielder, but he's just arrived at Feyenoord and he's had a pretty good start there. So at home to Celtic, you think, well, he's got the price, he's potentially got the fixture and the form, and yeah, he allows expensive players all around. So I think he's playing on, I want to say Tuesday, perhaps.
Yeah, he's playing on Tuesday. I was just having a look at the fixtures there because I mean, Feyenoord wouldn't necessarily stand out in their group, but they do in match day one because
they do in match day
Celtic
one,
do struggle in Europe sometimes.
And because it's Tuesday, if he doesn't work out, you can just say, okay, well, my 4.5 midfielder blanked, so what? In comes Bellingham on Wednesday instead. So that one's very. Sané, it was just a matter of picking one of the buy-ins, whether it's him or Gnabry or Musiala. I probably need to do a bit more research into that, really, just to see how the Bundesliga champions have tend to line up in these games. And I think Bundesliga is something else that fantasy football community covers quite well. So I might go there.
Nice little plug.
Nice little plug. Xavi Simons is just arrived at Leipzig. He had a really good season at PSV last year. I want to say that it was either joint top scorer in the Eredivisie, something like that. And that's a midfielder, so he has a lot of potential. Marcus Thuram, 6.5 million in the game, and he started well at Inter. I think there's a bit of out of position potential there. So I think that squad's okay. And because I was in such a rush there's actually 500,000 left over. So I've sort of gone from struggling with the budget to suddenly having 500,000 left. So I might try and do something with that in the next 24 hours. But after looking at all the other experts online with their squads, shamelessly copied some of them and come up with a team that's hopefully okay. Hopefully.
There's certainly some thought into it, especially with the Tuesday, Wednesday thing. I mean, I do really like that sometimes I find that the 4.5 million midfielder that we choose or the 4.0 million defender that we choose in FPL is someone who just rots on the bench, and it sort of I'm happy. I'm comfortable with how that works. But if there's a game that rewards you for just giving them a go and then being able to sub them off for someone who's a lot more reliable, it can just make for some more exciting moments. I mean, I could see Feyenoord getting a good result against Celtic, to be honest. And if you've started those two guys and they get something good, then great. It allows you, there's more opportunities for you to maximise your differentials. And yeah, there's a couple in there that certainly stand out. And yeah, it's also a good demonstration of how top heavy this particular game is with that forward line as well. So yeah, it's looking as a total layman, because I'm not really a Champions League player. I think it looks good. You've thought about it quite nicely. But yeah, a good point to obviously mention Fantasy Football Community, which is part of our Scout network. They cover all sorts of things. They cover a number of the different leagues that feed into the Champions League. So I'm going to use this as another opportunity to just, before we go, remind everybody to go and subscribe to the UCL Fantasy podcast and head to Fantasy Football Community for all of the different content ahead of the new Champions League season. There's also content there available for some of the other fantasy games out there in the world. If there's a fantasy game out there that can be covered, just, you bet they've got it covered. So head over to them for all of your sort of around the edges fantasy content. It's a good opportunity to discuss those sorts of things as well. So make sure you follow them on Twitter as well, actually, or X, or whatever. I mean, I'm just fed up of making this joke. Whatever you want to call it that. And go and follow them at Fantasy UCL Pod for additional pieces of information on there as well, especially ahead of match day 1. It can be very, very useful to find updates on teams, for example, and any new episodes and any new bits of content that come out between now and Tuesday's deadline, you're going to find there first. So make sure you've got all that sorted. So yeah, I think that's everything from me, Mark, unless there's anything you wanted to add to our budding selection of new UCL players who we've clearly just recruited.
No, I think I've had enough sort of 5-minute monologues there to have covered everything, I think. But yeah, please check out those websites, because I'm not an expert at all. Still sort of fairly new to it, but thanks to those articles, you can very quickly sort of get a bit of knowledge and get a bit of strategy. And hopefully that squad looks all right, and the benefits of doing a little bit of research before Tuesday night. And once more, the deadline is right up to kick off, which is 5:45 UK time.
Yeah, very, very useful. So do keep an eye out for that. And of course, actually, one thing I forgot to mention, Mark, is make sure you do enjoy Newcastle's return to the Champions League. I know some of us neutrals will be cheering you on from the sidelines. So yeah, fingers crossed for you. I think so. Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to level with everybody. I am a shameless. I will support every English team in Europe. Just who I am. I being a Reading fan, I don't have any strong dislike for any of them, really. So I always want to see the English teams do well. So you've got one armchair supporter over here, hoping you get a good result. At the very least, we got a number of Newcastle fans on the team, so I need you all in good mood this week.
One of them's in Milan, so bit of jealousy.
Exactly.
Bit of jealousy going on there. Hope he has a great time.
Yeah, hopefully it goes well. But with that, we shall leave you fine, folks, to the rest of your tinkering, whether or not that's FPL or UCL Fantasy, and we shall see you next time.
Bye.